And that's kind of what I want to talk to you today about, creating a different world and how we can all do that and why we all have a moral obligation to do that. But before I get into that, I want to go back 12 years. And I'm 12 years old and I'm at school in an English literature class. And for whatever reason, the teacher at the time brought up being vegetarian to the class. And she said something along the lines of, "What do you think of vegetarians?" And myself, my 12-year-old kind of young boyish arrogance, I put my hand up in the air. And she went, "Yes, Edward." And I said, "All vegetarians are pale, weak and skinny." And the whole classroom froze. And it was kind of ironic because I was the palest, weakest and skinniest in the class, and in many situations I still tend to be, but the irony was lost on me. And I turned over to the back left corner of the classroom because there's a girl called Natasha there, and Natasha was a vegetarian. And so I looked at her for validation for what I'd said, because I expected her to give me like a thumbs up and say correct answer, but she didn't. She looked at me and she was really angry and she had like malice in her eyes, and it kind of took me back a little bit, and I was like, have I said something wrong here? And the teacher didn't validate what I said. I thought she would be like, "Well done, Edward, correct answer, round of applause," and we'd move on with the day and I'd feel really chuffed with myself, but that's not what happened. And the whole classroom kind of froze, and I was like, have I said something wrong here? Like, have I done something wrong? Now, it's funny because I said a lot of things when I was 12 years old that probably were very outlandish and not very intelligent, but for some reason that one sticks out of my head so vibrantly. And even before I wasn't vegan, or even before I wasn't vegetarian, that still stuck out of my head that moment of time. And going vegan, I reevaluated a lot of my life, and I questioned a lot of things that I'd said and things that I'd done, and this was a moment I kept coming back to. And I said, well, why did I say this? I mean, it didn't seem true, obviously it wasn't true, but why did I say it? And it really reinforced to me the power of social and also familial indoctrination. From the moment we're born, we're raised with a set of ideals, and those sets of ideals are placed on us every year of life we have until we start living unconsciously and doing what we've been told to do by society and indeed by our family as well. And I realized, reflecting back on that moment, that I didn't say those things necessarily because I thought they were true, because they're not true. I said those things because I'd been told to say them. I mean, the only time that vegetarians were ever brought up in my home was when they were a joke. We'd laugh about vegetarians. Now, we didn't know who vegans were, 12 years ago, but if we did know who vegans were, vegans would have been the biggest hoot of our house, I can promise you that. But vegetarians were as far as we thought compassion towards animals went, so vegetarianism was the biggest joke in our house. We'd sit around at the dinner table, we'd eat all the animal flesh products we'd get our hands on, and we'd laugh at the expense of others. And so I went into the classroom that day with this set of ideals that said that vegetarians were going to die because they didn't have animal flesh, and if you don't have animal flesh, you're going to be protein deficient, zinc deficient, iron deficient, you're going to wither away, become scrawny, and obviously pass on to the next life. And that's what I thought, that's what I was saying. So I just really reiterated what I've been told to by society. It was an unconscious decision to say these things. It wasn't founded in any logic, it was founded in purely what I'd been raised to think. And I thought, wow, how powerful it is, the indoctrination and the conditioning that's set upon us by society. No wonder so many of us find it so hard to grapple with the idea of veganism, because from the moment we're born, this is what we're taught. This is the environment we're raised in, and therefore it must be difficult for us to question these things, because why would we question these things? Why do we question what we've always done? Why would we question the way that we've always lived? I mean, what would be the merit in questioning these things? Now, I want to go back 5 years. And so now I'm 19, I'm ordering pizza with a friend. Now the friend's vegetarian, and I said to him, should we get bacon on the pizza? And he looked at me and he said, no. And I said, why not? Why would you not want to get bacon on pizza? I said, bacon belongs on pizza. Can you even call pizza pizza if there's no bacon on top of it? I thought the idea of not having pig flesh on pizza was almost blasphemous in its nature. I thought it was ridiculous. He said, Ed, I don't think an animal should die for a pizza topping. I said, what are you talking about? These animals are bred for that purpose. We give them life, they give us bacon. And I was one of those bacon is life people, right? I'd have had a t-shirt that said bacon is life, I'd have probably walked past a vegan event and shouted bacon and steak and all of these things at people. That was the mindset I had, that was the mentality I was in. And I'd never really, up until that point, questioned why someone wouldn't want to have bacon, or indeed any sort of animal flesh on the pizza. Why would I question it? I enjoyed it. I liked how these things tasted. They were delicious. They fulfilled my basic gratification and sensory pleasure for that kind of nutrition, that taste. So why would I ever think about it differently? Why would I ever step out of my comfort zone and try and amuse someone else's thought process? Why would I ever question not eating these products? But my friend, he wouldn't do it. He didn't back down. He said, no, we're not going to do it. And consequently, I didn't get my pig flesh on the pizza that day. And I was resentful about that. I was annoyed by it. Now, things started to change for me really quickly 4 years ago. May 2014, I came across this story in the news. It was on the BBC News, an online piece. And the story was talking about a truck carrying 7,000 chickens crashing on the way to a slaughterhouse just near Manchester, which is a city in England. Now, I remember reading this story and feeling really full of horror because the journalist said that hundreds of the birds had died on the impact alone. I think in total, 1,500 of the animals died from the impact of the road traffic accident alone. And I thought, well, that's horrible. But what disturbed me even more than that was the fact that there were hundreds more of these animals who were alive. And they were on the side of the road bleeding out because they had broken bones and broken wings, broken combs and broken beaks, and they were mutilated, and they were alive suffering. And this word suffering became so important to me because I made the simple realization in that moment that the animals that I consumed had the capacity to suffer and feel pain, and therefore because they can feel these things, they have an inherent preference to avoid feeling these things. And I said to myself, I am a hypocrite, because here I am feeling sorry for these animals, but in my fridge is chicken breasts and chicken thighs, and yesterday's KFC, and KFC was my all-time favorite food. I absolutely adored fried chicken from KFC. I had a branch about 10 minutes walk from my flat. And I went there so often that the people who worked there knew me by my name and knew what my favourite order was, which was a Zinger box meal. So I'd go in there and they go, "Hi Ed, nice to see you again, would you like your Zinger box meal?" I'd say, "Yes please, as quick as you possibly can." I was a local, a regular, and in my fridge at that point was KFC from the night before, that Zinger box meal that I'd not quite finished. And I felt like such a hypocrite because here I was preaching one thing, but living another thing. And I thought to myself, is this good enough? Because here I am saying I'm an animal lover. I'd said all my life, I love animals. I came to Victoria probably 12 years ago and I went whale watching because I was such an animal lover. In fact, I'd go to zoos because I was an animal lover. In fact, I would sit and I'd look at the lions pacing up and down and I'd go, wow, isn't nature beautiful? And I'd put my hands through the prison bars to try and stroke some of the animals, and I think, wow, isn't this marvelous, these animals in their natural habitats? But I never saw through the bars. I never saw the bars for what they really were. I did these things because I thought that I was observing animals because I appreciate them and that I loved them. I'd watch David Attenborough documentaries and you know, my partner and I, we loved them. We'd sit and we'd watch whales in the ocean and orangutans in the rainforests, and we'd say, wow, animals are wonderful, and we'd be eating pig flesh and chicken flesh. The irony was lost on us. We were so disconnected from what we were doing, but in that moment, when I read about the chicken truck crash, I became connected to the reality of what was happening. I can no longer claim to be disconnected and willfully ignorant. I can no longer bury my head in the sand and say, I'm not aware of the things that are happening, because in that moment I was confronted with the very abject reality that animals were suffering and dying for me as an individual. And so I said to myself, what am I going to do about this? Can I continue to live my life knowing now that I'm a hypocrite, or do I have to make a change? Now thankfully I made the change, but unfortunately the change at that point was only to vegetarian because I didn't know about dairy and eggs. I thought vegans were weird and militant and extreme. I didn't understand vegans. We'd often talk about veganism, we'd like, these people take things too far. I mean, like, okay, animals should die, but dairy and eggs, that's great, right? These animals don't die for those products. I mean, dairy cows consume grass and they just produce milk, right? And the farmer just gets a bucket and collects the milk that the cow's producing and then feeds it to us. I mean, what's the harm in that? And free-range eggs are wonderful because a farmer just follows the hens around a field and picks up the eggs and puts them in a basket, right? That's what I thought. Or is it really what I thought? Because I read the labels and I believed the labels, but I think subconsciously I was aware that it wasn't true. But it was so convenient for me to believe that lie and that rhetoric because it made me feel comfortable. And so I fell into that paradigm of pretending to lie to myself over and over and over again. Now I'd been veggie for about 8 months, so my partner started saying we should watch this documentary called Earthlings. And I was like, no, like not gonna happen. She said, why not? And I said, look, that film's probably made by PETA, right? It's propaganda. They take bad farmers, bad slaughterhouses, bad practices, but I tell you what they don't do. They don't show the truth behind farming. They don't show the humane slaughter and the farmers who love their animals like children, even up until the point where they're murdered. They don't show that stuff. They just show the brutal, horrible side of stuff so people don't want to consume those things anymore. I said, I don't think it's right for people to have that shoved down their throats. And she said, well, all right, then if you feel so confident about it, then what have you got to lose? Like, if you don't feel that you're going to change, watch it, and don't change, but just watch it. And I said no. And this went on for a little while, and thank goodness she was very persevering about it. And then one morning, we woke up and we're in bed, and she got the laptop out, and she said, we're going to watch Earthlings. You can either get out of bed or you can watch it. And look, I don't do well on mornings. Like, I'm not a morning person, so I had two choices, and it's very simple. I wanted to stay in bed, so I said, okay then, put it on, right? And I thought, I can just fall asleep if I have to. But as soon as it came on, I was gripped. And 90 minutes later, I was crying my eyes out. And I went to see a little companion hamster that we had at the time. His name was Rupert, and my goodness, we loved Rupert so much. He would crawl on our arms and on our hands, and we just thought he was the most special being on the planet, because he truly was. But I remember I was sitting with Rupert, our companion hamster, and I was looking at him. And there's a scene in the film where one of the scientists holds up a hamster, or an animal like a hamster, and they inject them with some sort of chemical. And I remember looking at Rupert thinking, that could have been Rupert's. That animal could be the animal that I claim to love and cherish, whose life I cherish so dearly. But then it dawned on me that any of the animals in the film could be Rupert's. But it wasn't just about a hamster being a hamster, it's about the fact that an animal is an animal, and all these animals have that preference to live. And here I was, understanding and acknowledging that the animal that I loved in my home had a personality that was very individualistic and unique to that being. I recognized Rupert's likes and dislikes and wants, and I recognized that he was his own being with his own personality. And I thought, well, all of these animals, in essence, are the same then. And they may have different cognitive abilities and intelligence levels, and sure, they may not have the dreams and aspirations or capabilities that we possess as a species, but fundamentally what unites us all is the fact that we are alive, that our experience of life is unique to us, and we have a value of life that only we can assign to ourselves. And so I thought, I'm a hypocrite, again. Here I was feeling the same way I had about the chicken crash, but now 8 months later realizing that actually it's not just about meat, right? It's not just even about dairy and eggs, it's about the clothes we wear, the products we put in our hair and on our skin. In fact, I realized for the first time in my life that the exploitation of animals has permeated into nearly every single aspect of our daily life. So much so that to this day, we still can't quite comprehend the extent to which animals are exploited for us as individuals, but also as a species. I realized the vast magnitude of which animals are forced to suffer at our hands, the hands of one species, causing so much pain to all the other species that exist on this planet alongside us. And so I had to ask myself the same question that I asked myself about 8 months previous. Do I claim to be willfully ignorant? Do I bury my head in the sand and say that everything's fine and I'm not causing suffering to others? Or do I accept the simple reality that I am causing suffering to others? And now when we know better, we have an obligation to do better. And after seeing that film and seeing the truth of what happens in these industries, I knew better. And therefore I had an obligation to do better. And so thankfully, doing better at that point was going vegan. Now, I went vegan, but I was terrified. Because like I said before, I had all these labels for vegans. I thought they were weird and preachy and militant extremists and domestic terrorists and all these things. And I was terrified of being labelled in the same way. I was petrified, so I kept my veganism super quiet. And I was at uni at the time studying, so I'd go into my university class and I'd eat my chickpea salad with avocado, which was delicious, but I'd be watching everyone else eating their animal flesh, and I wouldn't say a word about it. I'd keep it super on the down low. Now this changed because I saw a documentary called Cowspiracy. Now Cowspiracy, as many of us maybe do know, but those of you who don't, is a documentary that explores how animal agriculture is destroying our home, our planet. It's ravaging our environment and destroying it at such an astronomical rate. And after I saw this documentary, I thought, enough is enough, I need to do something about this. Now at the time, I had a lot of environmentalist friends. The self-proclaimed environmentalists who don't really actually do anything for the environment, but like to wear the badge of honor. And I went into uni the next day, I was like, these people are gonna listen to me, they're gonna wanna hear it. So I went in and went, guys, sit down, we've got a big chat we need to have. Are you aware that consuming animal products is destroying the only home that we have? We have one planet to inhabit, and we're destroying it every single day. We sit on the brink of ecological disaster because of the actions that we make as individuals. We've got to do something about this. And this girl, Rhiannon, she walked up to me, really arrogantly, and she said, that's all well and good, Ed, but you know that soy farming is destroying the environment. And I looked at her, and I hesitated, and I froze, and I thought to myself, soy farming? That doesn't sound right. They don't really mention that in the film, but really? Is soy farming destroying the environment? I thought, well, I do eat a lot of soy milk and I consume a lot of soy products. I'm a self-proclaimed soy boy any day of the week, but here I was thinking to myself, do I really consume that much? Do vegans consume that much soy? But I hesitated, and I didn't know what to say to her. And in that moment, she looked at me and she was so smug. She was just so smug, and it got really under my skin because I knew in that moment I'd eased her conscience. And she'd go off and she'd consume whatever animal product she was going to do so, thinking that she'd got one up on a vegan, thinking that she'd beaten me in a debate and therefore she was justified to continue doing what she was doing. And I was like, no, this doesn't feel good. It's fine me being vegan, but the first time I've spoken about it, someone's confronted me about it, so I need to be prepared for this because I don't want to see that face again and have that feeling of that I'd done a disservice to the movement I cared about so deeply. So I went home. First thing I did was got Google up. I went, is soy farming bad for the environment? And lo and behold, soy farming is dreadful for the environment. It's destroying the rainforests. And I thought, my goodness. But then I explored it a little bit deeper, and it turns out that over 85% of the soy that we grow is fed to livestock animals, which inherently means that an animal-based diet is responsible for the soy causing the problems to the environment. And I thought, if only I'd known that. In that moment, I could have gone, Rihanna, that's a great point. But are you aware that 85% of the soy we grow is fed to livestock animals? So by default, you've almost just debunked yourself. And you've proven to yourself that you should be vegan. And she'd turn around and say, well, Ed, you got me, I'm going to be vegan from now on, right? No, it wouldn't have happened like that. It never happens like that. She'd have gone, yeah, but what about the food chain or something like that instead? But I'd have proved her wrong. And she wouldn't have gone off with that eased conscience, which is what I was so desperately, desperately upset about. And so I thought, well, hang on a second, there's going to be plenty more that people say to me, right? So I should probably learn some more stuff. So I spent quite a while just researching, and lo and behold, there are many excuses that people like to use to justify continue using animals. And I went through all of them, and I was like, okay, all right, I'm gonna get this. Like, this is good. I'm ready. Like, come at me. I'm gonna take what you got now. Let's go. But I wasn't going towards people to ask them it, and it was good because I was ready. But people weren't really asking me anything, and I was just kind of still eating my chickpea salads and still watching everyone else doing what they were doing, and it sat really uncomfortable with me. And I came across this phrase, and the phrase is silence is complicity. In essence, meaning that just because you don't engage in something, if you are aware of what's happening but you stay silent about what's happening, you remain complicit in the continuation of these things going on. Inherently, you remain complicit in what's happening in these industries. And I thought, if I'm walking down the street, per se, and I see someone being abused or discriminated based on the colour of their skin or their gender or sexuality, and I see that, and I acknowledge that it's happening, but I carry on walking, I don't do anything to stop it, I'm still complicit in that action, because I've acknowledged it, but I haven't done anything to stop it, which means I'm still complicit. And I thought, hang on, is it a similar thing here? I'm aware of what's going on, and I see what's going on, but I allow others to continue without saying a word or doing anything. And in essence, I'm still complicit in that action continuing because I'm bearing witness to it, but not doing anything to stop it or avoid it. And I thought, do I want to remain complicit? I know what's happening. I've researched it, I've watched it, I've seen it, I've read about it. Do I want to continue being complicit, or do I want to do something to stop it? Because it's no good just talking the talk if we're not going to walk the walk. And if I preach one thing, if I preach a vegan world, if I preach the end of violence in any form that it takes, insidious form that it takes on this planet, then I have to do something about that, because words are not enough. Our planet and the animals are not going to be saved by words alone. Words can't help, actions are what helps. And so I decided I had to become an advocate and actually impart the information, not wait for people to want to hear it, but actually give it to people, because I realized that I wish I'd been vegan my entire life. I wish I'd been born vegan, but I wasn't. As I said before, for nearly 21 years I consumed animal products. And I wish so dearly that someone had grabbed me and shaken me and said, Ed, wake up, look at what's happening, do something about it. But that didn't happen. And so I thought, I owe it to people to tell them what's going on, because even though they may not be grateful in the moment, and even though they may turn away and be angry at me, in the long run when they go vegan, which most people are going to do, whether they want to admit to themselves or not, they'll be grateful for that conversation, and they'll be grateful for the fact that someone did impart that information upon them. And so I set about having conversations with people, but I was angry. I was really, really angry, and I became quite misanthropic, and I found this burning hatred for humanity, for our species, because, as I said before, I'd looked at what we were doing, and I was furious that people that I loved and people who I knew to be good people were happy to continue partaking in these industries. And I looked at the actions of my parents and my friends at the time, and I thought, do I even know who you are? I thought I knew you, but here you are doing things that contradict even just the basic code of compassion that you seek to live by. Do I know who you are anymore? And so when I started advocating, veganism to people on the streets, I had this anger, this fuel inside of me that was really uncomfortable. And I remember I had this conversation with these two South African guys, and they talking about humane slaughter. And I said, there's no humane way to kill an animal. And they said, yes there is. I said, okay, then tell me, what is it? And they said, you put electricity through their head. And I said to him, how would you like it if your mum had electricity put through her head? And I said it in such a tone that he took a step back. And that was the end of the conversation. And in that moment, I pushed him further away from veganism than he was at the start of the conversation. And that was a huge point for me because I had to reevaluate myself. And I said, who am I doing this for? What am I doing this for? Because it felt good, like it felt really good for me to call someone out on what they were doing, but it didn't help. And it wasn't effective. And it pushed the person further away, and I said, okay, is this for me? Or is this for the animals who I say I care about? Because if it's for me, then great, you feel good afterwards. But if it's for the animals, then really, you're doing them a disservice because you're not helping the situation, you're pushing the people you're speaking to further and further away from the situation. And so I had to reevaluate the way I was speaking to people because we can't come from a place of hatred. And I realized that it's not healthy, it's not productive, it's not effective, it pushes people away, it makes you feel terrible, and it drives you further and further down into the dirt. Now there's a multitude of reasons we should be angry, and I haven't turned my back on the fact that I am angry because I'm an incredibly angry vegan, because we should be angry at what's happening in the world. We look at the state of things and it should make us feel angry because it's such an atrocity and it's such an injustice, but it's how we use that feeling that's important. Now I want to just simplify this really down to the bare bones and talk about why we should feel the way that we do feel. Let's consider for every single second that goes by globally, 3,000 animals are murdered. 3,000 lives every single second are taken globally for a completely unnecessary reason. That equates to about 56 billion land animals and as many as 2 to 2.7 trillion marine animals every single year. I've actually heard that the figure could be as high as 75 billion land animals. But it's not just that we kill these animals, it's that we raise billions of them in places called farms, where we deny them access to fresh air and sunlight, where we mutilate them by chopping off their tails, cutting off their teeth, we castrate them, we despud them, we dehorn them, we forcibly impregnate them, we take their babies away from them while they mourn and yearn for their babies. We exploit them for what they naturally produce for their own species, like their milk and their eggs. When we can no longer exploit them anymore, we put them in trucks and trailers, take them to a place called a slaughterhouse, where we hang them upside down, cut their throat, or gas them alive in gas chambers. And you expect me to not feel angry about that. You expect me to not feel angry that billions of animals, conscious sentient beings who very much live a similar life to us in terms of their ability to experience life. You expect me to not feel angry that we persecute these animals to such an extent where we no longer see them as beings but instead classify them as property and commodities and inanimate objects. It is an injustice the likes of which we have not yet understood. It's a disgrace what we do, and we should feel angry about it because it is wrong. Anger shows that we care. And when I say these things to you, it makes me feel that way, that fuel, that power, that passion, that fire inside of me. And let's look at the word slaughterhouse. I saw a video by a guy called David Coles, and he said, break up the word slaughterhouse. It means house of slaughter, house of murder, house of death, house of suffering. A slaughterhouse is a place where a living being is taken in, murdered, chopped into pieces, wrapped in plastic, shipped to a supermarket, so that the consumer can buy those products and pretend the blood isn't on their hands. But we must all acknowledge that the accountability and blood lies on each and every one of our hands. And even if we don't partake in the actual act of killing ourselves, our money alone is what fuels those industries, and by default the blood is very much on our hands. And we can wash our hands as much as we like, but the blood is there stained with every purchase that we make. A house of slaughter. And these places aren't rarities, they don't exist here and there, they exist everywhere in their thousands globally. They're normalized, they're socially accepted, they're legalized, and they exist every single second until this point today. Let's also look at the fact that animal agriculture is destroying our home, like I said before. It's responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation system combined. It's responsible for up to 91% of Amazon rainforest destruction. It's responsible for land desertification, oceanic dead zones, and also is the leading factor in the next largest mass species extinction. Scientists predict that by the year 2048 we may well have fishless oceans. In most of our lifetimes we could have fishless oceans. Is that not terrifying to us? Is that not a wake-up call that we need to act now and change while we still have the chance? Because like I said, we sit on the brink of an ecological disaster, and every action that we make today can either push us further and further to the precipice or pull us further and further away. But that decision lies in each and every one of our hands, yet so many of us unconsciously continue to push closer and closer to the precipice, knowing that we're going to tumble off the edge to a place where we can no longer inhabit this planet, will become barren and uninhabitable to us. We're destroying the only home that we have. We must change. The United Nations has categorically stated that to avoid the worst effects of climate change, the world needs to shift to a plant-based diet. It's not vegan propaganda. That's not PETA. It's not a vegan organization or a vegan activist. That's the United Nations making a very stark and clear call to action, saying that if we do not change, we will be the ones to reap the consequences of our inaction today. It's not just the non-human animals who are going to suffer. We as a species will suffer as well. What sort of world do we want to leave behind for our children and grandchildren? What sort of planet do we want to have for our children and grandchildren? Because that power lies now in the hands of us, the consumer, to decide, and every action that we make, no matter how small and insignificant it may seem, has a profound effect that we must acknowledge immediately and make changes to signify our intent for the world that we want. Now, I always feel that it'd be ironic if it wasn't so cruel, but unfortunately it's so incredibly cruel that our leading diseases and illnesses, preventable diseases and illnesses, are caused hugely by the fact that we consume animal products. Heart disease, certain forms of cancer like colon, breast and prostate, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, hypertension, kidney failure, strokes. These diseases can be massively attributed to the fact that we consume animal-based products, but a simple switch to a plant-based diet can not only reverse them, but it can treat and prevent many of them as well. In fact, people are reversing their heart disease and type 2 diabetes all across the world right now. And this issue really hits home to me because my family has illness within them. And yet when I try and speak to them about it and I try and tell them about it, it falls on deaf ears. My stepdad has type 2 diabetes. He's overweight, he's obese. His father had a stroke. And they think it's just part of the family genetics. They won't wake up and understand. I bought them a documentary called Forks Over Knives 2.5 years ago, and to this day they still haven't watched it. And I say it's not about the animals. They don't use the vegan word. Don't do it for me. Do it for yourself to add quality and quantity to your life. Yet we're so blinded by the propaganda that we're fed by these industries, by the idea that using animals is normal, natural, and even necessary. There's so many people blindly walk to their own preventable deaths because they value the taste of these products indeed over their own life as well as the lives of others. We should feel angry about this. We've been lied and manipulated to and scammed for decades. And now we are at the forefront of what is about to happen. And people are beginning to wake up, but not fast enough. We must use that fire and that passion to channel us and to fuel us. But like I said before, when we advocate, we must not be angry, because to come from a place of anger creates a sense of hopelessness. And hopelessness turns to apathy. Apathy turns to inaction. And what we desperately, desperately do not need any more of is inaction. We must be hopeful. We must be optimistic, because the world that we want is available to us. It exists there right in the palm of our hands. And all we must do is reach out and take it. Each and every one of us has the potential to reach out and take and create that world that we so desperately dream of every single day, every single moment of life that we have. Now, I think it's really wonderful that we live in a system where we can directly influence what products are sold in the supermarket shelves. These industries operate only on supply and demand, meaning they are forced to sell these products to us because we must buy them to fuel their industries. But that means that every time we buy something different, a plant-based milk, a vegan cheese, whatever it is, we're changing the world that we want for our purchases alone. Such a simple thing that we can do on our day-to-day lives has a real impact to this world. But is it enough? Is it enough to simply just buy these products and pretend we're creating the change fast enough? Or do we have to take the responsibility to do more to just simply buy these products? Places like this are wonderful because they show us what it is that we can live and what it is that we can enjoy as a vegan. But is it simply enough to support these industries with our money, or do we have to do something to create that change further? Now, I used to believe that veganism was the moral baseline. When I went vegan, I thought that being vegan was the absolute minimum that we should do to achieve the moral baseline. However, I was educated, schooled on this, and I became very much aware that veganism isn't the moral baseline, that veganism as itself sits below the baseline of morality. And in fact, it's vegan activism that's the moral baseline. Being an activist is the bare minimum that we can do to achieve the moral baseline. And there's an analogy that I heard that I think is really poignant. And I think it really summarizes this point perfectly. And the analogy goes, there's a person walking down the street, and at the end of the street there's another person who's beating and killing a dog with a stick. Now the first person is confronted with this question, because the second person says, I have another stick, come join me and we can beat and kill this dog together. And the first person is faced with three options, three choices. The first choice that he can make is he can say, I see what you're doing. What you're doing is wrong and immoral. The first choice he can make is he can say, sure, I'll take the second stick and we'll beat and kill this dog together, very thinly veiled. That's non-veganism. But the second choice, more importantly, is the person can say, I see what you are doing. What you are doing is wrong and immoral, and as such, I will not participate in the action of beating and killing that dog. The second choice is non-veganism, because veganism is non-participation. It's seen an action or an industry that you don't agree with and say that you will no longer partake in that action or industry. But importantly, if the person takes the second choice, the dog still gets beaten and the dog still gets killed. Now the third choice the man can make is he can say, I see what you are doing. What you are doing is wrong and immoral, and not only will I not do to create and shape that world that I preach and I think of and I dream of. Now places like Vegtoria are wonderful because we get to meet like-minded people, we get to enjoy vegan food, we get to celebrate being vegan, we get to celebrate living that way and that lifestyle. But what we all know is that after today, when all this is closed down and packed away and we go off into the world that we currently live in, we know that the reality of Vegtoria does not translate to the reality of the world that we exist in. We know we're going to go out into the streets, we're going to go into a supermarket, where every time we go in we have to be confronted by a morgue of dead, butchered animal parts. We realize every day that we walk out into the streets we're going to be confronted by people wearing the skins of other beings or consuming the flesh and secretions of the animals that we claim and that we know that we care about. That's the reality of the world that we live in. Vegtoria is one day of the year, but for the rest of the days, 365 days, animal exploitation is normalized. It is very much a brutal, objective truth of the society that we currently exist in. And I don't like that. I can't stand to live in that world. And if you feel the same way that I do, then we have to do something to create that difference. Now, I use the word fight a lot, and it's quite an emotive word, and I think it's really important to emphasize that when I use the word fight, I'm not referring to a fight of violence. Our fight is not against nations or governments or people. Our fight is against ignorance and apathy. And the only weapon that we need is the truth and a voice to speak it. And by voice, I mean both a physical voice to advocate, but I also mean that in less of a literal sense. I mean we have to do something with the lives that we are given, something that we can all do that's unique and special to us. What can we do to bring down these industries that normalize the use of animals? Because they are multifaceted. They are multifaceted industries, and therefore we need to attack them from every single angle that we can. You do not need to do what others do. You just have to do something to bring about that change. Anything that we can, we have an obligation to do. That duty lies on each and every one of our shoulders, and we must face the burden that we all collectively share. The weight of the world lies on each and every one of our shoulders, and each and every one of us who takes that burden and that responsibility lightens the load for others. If we share the responsibility and fight together to create that world and fight to eradicate ignorance and apathy, that is when we can make huge changes to the planet that we live on. And I swear, those changes will occur. They are occurring. It's happening every single second of the day. It is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And we have to be the ones to drive that change. There's another analogy that says, a blind person is walking down the street, and at the end of the street there is a hole that the blind person can obviously not see. Now on the other side of the road there is a person who can see and who is watching. If the blind person continues and falls into the hole, it's the fault of the person who could see but chose to say nothing. It's not the fault of those who shop unconsciously if they continue to perpetuate those industries. It's the fault of those who can see and choose to say nothing. And we are the ones who can see. We are the ones who are aware of what is happening every second of the day. We are the ones who have had our eyes opened, and therefore if we continue down this route of destruction and violence, the fault and accountability lays on our shoulders, not on those who buy those products but do so without knowing the reality. We know the truth, and therefore when we allow others to continue shopping whilst they are uneducated, it is not their fault, it is our fault. So we must speak up. We are obliged to speak up. We have a duty to do what we can. Now I'd like to talk about two incidents that I've had during my activism, two things that have happened, two situations I've been in. I want to talk about what they've meant to me and how they've changed how I feel about so many different things. Now the first thing I want to talk about is when I visited a dairy farm. And this was the first time I'd visited a dairy farm. I've been on many since, but this was the first time I ever visited one. And we wandered onto the farm in the middle of the day, much on a day like today. And we had cameras and we knew what it is that we were going to see. So we wandered around and we were taking pictures and footage of the animals in the prisons that they were in. We saw the milking parlours and we saw the whole situation, the whole system of a dairy farm. Now, as we were wandering around, we came across a pen. And in this pen was a dairy cow and also her child, a mother and child. And the child was still so newborn that the mother was still cleaning the child. And we stood there and we watched. And the farmers knew we were there, and they'd seen us, and they didn't really seem to care about our motives. Obviously, we didn't tell them that we were vegan, but they didn't bother to ask either. So he came up to us and he said that he was going to take the baby away from the mother. Now, we knew this happened. Obviously, being vegan, we were aware of the brutality of the industry that exploits animals for their secretions. We knew that these animals were forcibly impregnated. We knew their babies were taken away from them. But in that moment, we were forced to confront whether or not we'd like to see the action occurring. And so we were faced with two options. The first was to leave and to turn away and to walk away. And the second option was to stay and to film it and to watch it. Now, we quickly realized that if we were to leave, that doesn't change the reality of what's happening. We can turn away from suffering, but that doesn't mean the suffering stops. We should not avert with our eyes what they are forced to endure with their bodies. Just because we turn away and pretend that it's not happening does not mean that it stops happening. It's a reality that occurs whether or not we want to face it or not. And so we stayed, and we filmed, and we watched. And we watched as the farmer came into the pen with a trolley. He picked up the calf and he threw the calf into the trolley and started to wheel the calf away. Now I followed with the mother, and I followed alongside her as far as we both could. And the farmer closed the gate on the mother, and she watched as her baby was wheeled away from her. And that was the last time she ever saw her child. Now she watched, and then she caught my eyes, and she made eye contact with me, and I saw in her eyes fear, anguish, pain. But I saw confusion as well. And the confusion is what broke my heart, because it dawned on me these animals are confused. They don't understand why this is happening. Obviously, they don't speak our language, we don't speak theirs, we can't communicate why we're doing these things, so they're confused. All they know is they've been born into this world and they suffer. They have these horrible things done to them, but no one can ever explain why or justify why these things are happening. They're born into this world completely without clue of why they are forced to endure this pain and agony. And when I saw that confusion, it reminded me of all the times I've been most scared of my life. And every time I've been most scared, I've also been most confused as well. Because when we can't comprehend the situation we're in, it heightens the fear and it heightens the horror of that situation. And I thought these animals are more scared than even I had grown to realize myself. I realized that they faced the fear and horror more intensely than maybe we even imagine. I followed where the calf had been taken. The calf had been taken to a solitary confinement pen. Dairy calves, when they're taken away from the mothers, are put in these pens. In the UK, it's up to 8 weeks at a time. In some countries, it's longer. So I followed to where the calf had been put in the pen. I sat down and I put my hand through the bars. And I gently stroked the top of the calf's head. But it felt really disingenuous of me. And I looked at my hand, and I looked at what I was doing, and I thought, who am I doing this for? This is good for me, it makes me feel like I'm doing something, but this isn't helping the calf. And so I said, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry you're here. I'm sorry this is what you're forced to endure. I'm sorry this is your life. But it felt so empty. The words I'm sorry felt meaningless and hopeless, and they did nothing to change the life of that animal. And so I took a step back, and I put my arm outside of the prison, and it dawned on me that I could walk off at any moment that I wanted to. I could leave, go home, be with my friends, my family, sleep in a comfortable bed, enjoy my life, do the things that I wanted to do the things that made me happy. But this animal was therefore forced to spend their entire life in this prison. And the only time they would leave is when they were taken to a house of slaughter to have their life taken from them needlessly. And so I said to myself, words are not enough. Animals don't need our words. They don't need our sorrow, and they do not need our pity. They need our actions. Saying I'm sorry is passive. It implies hopelessness. It implies a lack of anything being able to change. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It felt like nothing. And so I said to myself, I will not use just words anymore. I must do something that means and has a statement of intention. And so I stood over the calf and I said, I'm going to make a vow in this moment. And so I made a vow, and the vow I made is that with every second of life that I'm given, whilst blood flows through my veins and oxygen is pumped through my lungs, I will fight, and I will do what I can. And even though I acknowledge in that moment that I will not be able to save the life of that animal, and that their fate has been sealed by the world that we live in and the consumer who demands that fate to be sealed, I will make sure, and I'll try the absolute best that I can with my life, that one day there will be a world where no animal will have to suffer and endure the same fate as that baby in front of me there in that day did. I made that vow to myself to hold myself accountable, so that if I ever said, I don't want to do that, that makes me feel uncomfortable, that makes me feel nervous, I'll remember that I made a vow in that moment to create that change. There is no more time. We cannot use our own comfort to justify not doing what must be done. It is time now to act and do what has to be done. The world is crumbling, the animals are dying, and words will not save them. Actions are what will save them. Animals do not need our pity. Don't say you feel sorry for them. Fight to create a different world for them. I made that vow in that moment to hold myself accountable, so if I ever wanted to waver in my conviction or my determination, I'd remind myself of the tangibility and realness of what it is that we face, because in that moment you cannot deny the suffering. If we turn away, we can try and deny it, but when we see it and we face it and we confront it, we can no longer deny it. It is real, it is happening. The world is changing, like I said before. But until the point that it's changed in its entirety, these things will still continue. And until it's changed in its entirety, we are obliged to continue going and striving and demanding that change. And the second case I'd like to speak about is when I visited a slaughterhouse in Manchester, again the place in England. Now at this slaughterhouse they kill pigs, and they do so using a gas chamber. And what that inherently means is that they load 2 to 3 pigs into a gondola, a chamber, and they lower the pigs into an abyss that's filled with CO2, carbon dioxide. And this CO2 burns the animals from the inside out. It burns the moisture in their throat and their lungs, behind their eyes, and it causes an incredibly painful death for them. Now, interestingly, the industry touts this as being the most humane method of pig slaughter. Indeed, it's the most humane method here in Canada, in the US and Australia. It's the most humane method of pig slaughter, indeed, across the world, the Western world. And I found out afterwards that they could use a different gas. I can't remember the name of the gas, but they could use a different gas that actually wouldn't cause any of the aversion that the CO2 uses. But they use the CO2 because it's cheaper than the other gas. Now, it doesn't matter what gas they use. It'll never be humane, because we can never humanely take the life of an animal who wants to die. The word humane fundamentally means having or showing compassion or benevolence. You can never compassionately or benevolently take life when you don't need to, and therefore there is no such thing as humane slaughter. It's an oxymoron. But remember that when these industries say that they kill these animals humanely and they care about the well-being and welfare of these animals, remember they use a gas that is more aversive and causes more pain because it's cheaper. Remember that. Remember when they tell you these lies that they only value profit margins and financial gain. They don't care about these animals. These animals are nothing other than property from which they can profit from the lifeless bodies. And so at this slaughterhouse you can go around the side, and I kid you not, it's a dog walking path. And you can follow this dog walking path and you come to a little grassy verge. If you follow up the verge, you come to gates. And about 4 meters, 5 meters in front of the gates is a corrugated iron wall. Now on the other side of the wall, there are the holding pens for the pigs. And there's also the gas chamber. And you can go up to the fencing, and you can hear a radio station playing. And the radio station is normally something like Radio 1, which in the UK is like a pop channel. It plays Taylor Swift and Drake and Nicki Minaj and all the upbeat tempo music. And you can hear the workers working around, and you can hear the music playing. And then all of a sudden you hear the pigs being herded into the gas chamber. And you can hear them being prodded and hit and forced into the chambers. You can hear them start to scream. You hear the mechanism of the gas chamber begin. You can hear the gondola being lowered. And then all of a sudden you can't hear the radio station. You can't hear the person you're sat next to or stood next to, because all you can hear is the screams of the animals, and they scream so deafeningly loud. And the person you were talking to mere meters or feet in front of you is no longer audible, because the screams of these animals are so piercing and so ferocious. They scream and they cry for mercy, and you can hear them banging against the metal cages, desperately trying to escape. But their screams of mercy fall on deaf ears from people who value the taste of these products over the life of the animal. And so after about 20 seconds to 30 seconds, the animals fall silent. And in that moment, it's almost a symbol of peace, because you know they're suffering for the first time and their life is over, and they are now no longer forced to endure the life that they were born into. But as soon as that moment of peace arises, you can hear the gondola go back up. And it continues, 2 to 3 pigs at a time, over and over and over again. And those chambers are spinning right now. And those chambers are filled with pigs right this very moment, all across the world, screaming and thrashing, fighting to escape. Now I stood there and I cried. And afterwards someone said to me, why did you go? You knew you couldn't save the pigs. You knew that you were just going to to stand there and listen. You knew what was going to happen. You've seen this stuff on YouTube, on Facebook. You knew what this slaughterhouse did, and you knew what it is that you would hear. So why did you go if all you could do was cry? And I said, these industries want us to pretend these animals don't exist. They want us to reduce them to nothing other than numbers, property, objects. This tag that I wear around my neck came from a cow who was murdered in Barcelona. My friend runs the Vigil in Barcelona, and she got this tag from a cow who was killed there. This tag belonged to a real animal. They were numbered 4848 and given a barcode. These industries want to reduce these animals to nothing other than numbers and barcodes, strip them of their life, strip them of their individuality, strip them of their own idiosyncratic behaviors, and make us think that their life is worthless, make them think their life does not even exist. When we go to these places and we see these animals and we hear these animals, we do the opposite of what these industries want us to do. We say we see you, we hear you, we feel you, we smell you, we acknowledge you, and we won't forget you. We recognize you as the individual you are. You are not a number, you are a being whose life, like us, is just as miraculous and marvelous as our own indeed existence is to us as an individual as well. These industries want us to pretend that these animals don't suffer. But when we go there and we see them, we acknowledge their suffering. They've hidden behind lies for too long. They've perpetuated lies for too long. And now they are beginning to fear us. These industries fear the change that is coming because for so long they've hidden the truth. But the truth is finally getting out there. And people are waking up and realizing the horror and the brutality and the violence of what is occurring. Good, honest, compassionate people are realizing they've been duped into believing an industry that scams us, that lies to us, that makes us go against our own innate values and morality, and makes us purchase products that if we knew the truth about, we would not want to purchase again. And when we go to these places, we reveal the truth. And we no longer hide behind the comfort of pretending that what happens is humane or acceptable or normal or necessary. No longer will we do what they want. No longer will we abide by the rules they've set upon us. Instead, we'll create our own world. We'll create a world where these ear tags are used as only a memory of the distant things that we used to do to other beings. I promise you that in the future, we will show our children slaughterhouses and farms. And we'll say, look at what we used to do. We're sorry for what we used to do. But thank goodness we woke up and did something about it. We will teach our children one day that what we used to do to animals was abhorrent and disgusting, but we learned from what it was that we were doing. We woke up to the truth and we changed, and we will never, ever, ever do anything like it ever again. I promise you one day that all slaughterhouses will be burned to the ground and all farms will be turned into sanctuaries where animals are allowed to live out their lives in peace, tranquility and harmony just as they're supposed to. And like I said before, the world that we want exists out there in front of us in the palm of our hands. It exists there for us to take. But we have to be the ones to take it. It's not going to be handed to us on a silver platter. No one's going to come along and push it towards us, but it is there. And all we have to do is reach out and grab it and take it. That's all we have to do. Believe in yourself. Empower yourself to know that you have the ability to create a profound change. We're often told that one person can't make a difference, that our life is futile and our abilities in life are futile. But I tell you that this is not true. One person can inspire 1,000 minds. And all we have to do is use the voice that we have to speak up at every opportunity and situation we find ourselves in. That's how we create the change. Advocate as if it was your life on the line. Because what if it was us? What if we were the ones in the slaughterhouses or in the farms or in the trucks and trailers? What if we were the ones in the circuses and the marine parks being goaded to perform tricks? What if we were the ones in the cages being skinned alive for our fur and our skin? What if we were the ones in laboratories tied down for makeup and cosmetics to be tested on us? What would we say? What would we expect of those who said that they cared about us? We'd expect them to be quiet. If we were the ones in that situation and we saw all of us, a crowd of us, what would we expect of us, the ones who said that we cared? We'd expect them to do something. Now when I see these animals in these slaughterhouses, and I go up to the trucks, and I say I'm sorry to these animals, I'm not just saying sorry to the animals who were there in that moment. I'm saying sorry to all the animals who died for me before, because like I said, for almost 21 years of my life, I paid for animals to die for me as an individual. And although I'll never be able to change that, when I say sorry, I'm saying I'm trying. And I'm going to do what I can to ask for forgiveness. And even though forgiveness should never be granted to me, it's a statement of intention to say that I've recognized that what I was doing is wrong. Now, most of us weren't born vegan. So what are we going to do to ask for forgiveness for the ones who suffered and died for us? Because merely changing is not enough. And although it's an amazing thing to do, we do not rid ourselves of our past transgressions just because we no longer commit them. We're still guilty for the things that we once did, and as such we have to repent in a different way. And we repent by saving those who are yet to be born into existence. Now, when I'm older, and I'm looking back on my life, I want to say two things to myself. Two things. I want to say, what the hell? I want to say, what the hell are we thinking? What the hell were we thinking? How insane was our species that we normalized this violence? I want to say, what the hell were we thinking? We used to mutilate animals, take them to places to take their lives from them needlessly, and dare to call that food. I want to say, what the hell were we thinking? We locked animals in cages, led cows on death marches to be skinned and for their flesh to be turned into leather, and dare to call that fashion and beauty, and parade their murdered carcasses down a catwalk and clap joyously at how beautiful their skin belonged and how beautiful their skin was when it looked on their bodies. I want to say, what the hell were we thinking? We tied animals down to laboratory tables, cut them open while they were still alive, tested on them, and dared to call that beauty, and had the audacity to claim that that was scientific. I want to say, what the hell were we thinking when we went to these places and we clapped and goaded animals? They were forced to jump through rings of fire or walk along tightropes because they'd been so psychologically abused. They feared the inevitable punishment that would arise if they refused to do what they were being demanded to do. I want to say, who were we? Who did we claim to be when we said we were compassionate and evolved? What were we doing? How insane, how completely ludicrous that we did these things without a second of self-awareness, without a second of objectivity to just assess what it was that we were doing. But most importantly, I want to say thank goodness. I want to say thank goodness we woke up. I want to say thank goodness we created that change while we still had the chance. Thank goodness we saved our planet from the brink of ecological disaster. Thank goodness we woke up and empowered ourselves to be healthier, to live longer, to have more fulfilled lives. And I want to say thank goodness we came to our senses and stopped exploiting trillions of animals every single year for our own personal gain. Our life is not just for us. The life that we have is a vessel to create and spread positive change. We must look beyond the narrow-sightedness of our own noses and acknowledge the interdependent web of life that exists on this planet in harmony and in unison. These animals are here with us, not for us, and their existence is as precious to them as our existence is to us. I want to say thank goodness that we created a world where tolerance, peace, compassion, and equality are no longer seen as weird and extreme or idealistic, but are instead the norm. These are the foundations of the society that we have created. Peace, equality, compassion, tolerance. They're no longer outlandish ways of thinking. They're simply the set of rules that we live and dictate our lives by. The world that we want is not some fantasy. It exists in the future, and we have the power to create that world. People often say to me, do you think a vegan world will happen? I say it's inevitable. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And we are the ones who decide the when. Every time that we have that conversation, every time we do what we can to advocate and be an activist, we bring that when closer and closer to the future. We take it and we drag it closer towards us. But every time we miss that chance, or we put ourselves first in that situation, we push that when further and further into the future. We are the ones who decide. We are the ones who decide. So decide today when you want that to happen. And if you want it to happen as quickly as it possibly can, that we know what needs to be done. Have those conversations. Speak up whenever you can. Do whatever it is in your life or the situation that you've been given to do what you can to create that world. Dream of it. Think of it. Manifest it. But most importantly, create it. Make it. take it. Let's make this world that we want the reality from this second forward. No longer do we rely on Vegtoria, a day of happiness once a year. We create the world that we want, the world where things like Vegtoria are normal. This is the normal, and brutality towards animals is no longer seen as a normalized way of thinking. We understand that all life should be granted the basic fundamental right to just live that life if they can. And the animals that we exploit, we do not need to exploit. They should live their life. They should be allowed the basic fundamental rights that we attribute to ourselves. It's the basic right to live. If you feel the same way that I do, from this moment on, make the vow that I made. Vow that with every second of life that you are given, you will fight to create positive change, and you will fight to create the world that we all speak of. We can no longer speak of it. We must create it. Thank you so much for listening.